Good evening, and welcome again to Public Perspective. I'm your host, Kevin McDermott, and tonight we'll be talking about some alternative ways to think about healing and health, and how you can fix some of those nagging problems that you've been contending with for who knows how long. Our guest tonight is Mary Fleming, integrative mind-body therapist. So, Mary, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure
Thanks
to
for
have you
having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
So let's talk a little bit, just right off the bat, about what kinds of therapy you do, and then we'll talk about why they're effective and how they're different.
Great. I've been trained in many different types of therapy. I basically mostly do craniosacral therapy.
And you have to describe what that is.
I will. And somato-emotion release, they kind of go together. Basically, craniosacral therapy is connecting with the body with a really light touch and kind of with intention, sort of helping the body unwind or release old patterns of behavior.
So how does that work if you're barely touching? What makes it effective?
The physiology that I've been explained is that we're connecting with the meninges, the connective tissue that covers the brain, the spinal cord, and the tailbone. Every nerve in the body, all the muscles, the tendons all end up there. So by working mostly in that area, you can kind of connect to all parts of the body. And what's kind of interesting is there's been a lot of recent research about, they used to think it was just a covering, and that's all it was.
That the meninges was
a
covering.
That's all. It was like a covering that kept the liquid in, the craniosacral fluid, which actually is kind of like was considered kind of like a buffer or like a padding for the spine and the brain and the tailbone. And now they're finding that there's all these qualities, bioelectric qualities to that area of the body.
Itself, right?
In the fluid, but also on the connective tissue around the meninges. And they're just still finding all the time new information about why it works. It's kind of interesting because initially I spent a lot of time trying to convince clients, and then I just said,
that this was
why you might be interested or whatever. Finally, I just said, let the results speak for themselves. And that's kind of, you know, I mean, I've never advertised. This is the first really super public thing I've done. But I've been working since 1995, and if you can help people, they'll come back. Yeah, I just think, I think probably 20 years from now, they'll have some more specialized instruments that'll measure what exactly is happening, but right now.
So give me an example of something that, like what would I come to you complaining of that you might approach with craniosacral therapy?
I have people for all kinds of different things. Some of it's strictly physical. They come for a physical problem that they've been to a couple different doctors or chiropractors or massage therapists. It doesn't really go away.
The nagging pain,
nagging
back pain,
back pain is very problematic. A lot of people come for headaches. Sometimes people will come for anxiety. It's very good for anxiety because basically a lot of the way I work is connecting people to their body.
Aren't they kind of living inside their body?
They are, but in our culture, we're a very crazy culture. People are very disassociated from their body. You'd think with all the working out and everything that people would be really connected to their body, but that's more of a control of the body. They're not really listening to the messages their body is giving them.
Connected in the sense, it's a different way of using that word, connected.
Yeah, connected meaning listening to your body, understanding what it's trying to tell you. If I get a headache every time I visit my mother-in-law.
There's a connection here.
Yeah, and that's a really superficial, you know.
That's a cliche.
But it's a cliche. But sometimes it is a person, or sometimes it can be an emotion that's coming up that they're trying not to feel. There's all kinds of, you just never know. I was telling you earlier, it's kind of like I feel like I'm reading a new book every time a new client comes. What will it be? You just don't always know.
So you also mentioned before the show when we were talking that you yourself find yourself listening to the body.
Right.
But you're listening through your hands.
Through your hands, kind of, it's a very crazy thing when you think of it. What I believe, and there are more and more research coming out, that we're not just our body, there's also like an energy field that has information, and I think that's kind of how information comes to me, and some people are able to, as those energy fields come together, get information to help the person. Also, I'm looking at their face. Is their face flushing? Lots of times people, their neck will start to get red, or the body will heat up.
While you're doing this
While
therapy.
I'm doing this, or they'll have like electrical charges, kind of like if, I don't know if you've had acupuncture, but
Yes,
when you
I
get
have.
acupuncture and then sometimes you get the right spot, or it's like a zing.
No, yes.
That will happen. Sometimes there's a trembling in the body. There's all kinds of physical manifestations that something's happening.
That's remarkable. And I come back to the idea of listening through your fingers, which is such a wonderful suspension of the normal way of thinking.
Right.
Of course, we listen with our ears, but that's
Right.
not really true. I
Right.
think we understand through all of our senses, right?
Right. And I think it's a way that we don't value in our society, and we don't really understand it, so people dismiss it. They're like, well, you got to have the facts. And I was kind of like that at the beginning of my practice. I would read all the books. I tried to do it exactly as I was taught. And then finally I realized the more I kind of backed off and would just listen to the body, the more people were helped. So it's not about me and knowing every piece of the anatomy. It's like, what is that body trying to show me?
And so give me a sense, when you're there and doing this, what would the body tell you? Let's say I came in and you were doing this with me, and like many guys my age, yes, I do have some lower back issues.
Right.
So what would you be listening for?
Well, initially, I almost always put my hands underneath the person's head and their tailbone. That just kind of connects me to pretty much the breadth of the body. And then I just wait. And sometimes I'll notice, oh, this person's, the whole area around the tailbone is really tight, kind of like that.
And you can detect
Oh,
that.
you can feel that. You can feel that. It's a physical feeling in the hand. It's like, wow, that's interesting. Even though they're laying down, the body isn't relaxing. It's, this area is really tight. And I'll say, wow, I noticed that you're really tight there. Do you have low back problems? Some said yes, sometimes no. No, my problem with my leg. And then I'll say, well, that to me almost always says that a person is kind of in a fight or flight response. And a lot of, I feel like the work that I'm doing is getting people connected to that they are in a fight or flight response.
Because you make them realize that this is going on.
Because lots of people don't. And I'd say, well, what in your life are you, tightened down? Because as soon as you get into the fight or flight response, it sends a cascading number of like chemical reactions in the body, physical reactions. It's an old evolutionary system, which was great when we were running from tigers. But when your boss yells at you and you have to sit at your desk all day, it kind of gets...
And just absorb it.
Yeah, just absorb it. It gets trapped. And we don't really always know how to release it. And lots of times we just tamp it down and say, oh, it didn't bother me. And then that builds over time. And the more you can get people in touch with, oh, wow, what is that about? And usually as soon as I ask, they'll say, oh, and you can start to feel the heat, usually is what I feel. And they'll start talking. And then once they start talking, if the body changes, moves, starts to release, starts to relax, I know I'm on the right path. So I feel like sometimes I'm like a little detective in the body, watching these minute changes to see, are we going in the right direction?
Okay.
So.
And now you also mentioned just, psychological things like, well, my boss is always, giving me a hard time, or I feel under stress at work. So is part of this a psychological exploration as well?
I mean, I have a psychology degree from University of Illinois, so I'm sure maybe that sneaks in. I feel like it's not as much psychological as just listening to the body. I'm not doing really psychological processing. But it is about emotion and thoughts, which is the realm of psychology. I guess it's kind of riding the edge in a way. But I'm approaching it from the body, not from the mind as much.
So what are some of the things that surprise you when you do this? I'm sure you
Oh
get
my
those.
gosh, I just never know what's going to happen. Sometimes it's just something really unexpected. I can give you an example. I had a client who was a business executive, and he came to me. He was sent by his wife. I get a lot of people send their husbands to me for some reason. But his biggest stress reliever was playing pickup basketball. Well, actually it wasn't pickup, it was a regular league, and he just loved it. But he had a pain in his back, a certain point in his back, and it was keeping him from this thing he loved. And we worked together, and I, just kind of playing with that area and letting him talk. And then all of a sudden I said, well, and I don't even know how to explain how I knew this, but I said, this feels like a really old injury. Did you have something, early on in your life? And I said, what kind of, you had a pretty severe, it just kept coming to me, a very severe injury. Well, it turns out when he was in high school, he was a football player. And he got injured so severely that he was in one of those halos
Oh my.
for like 6 months.
Yeah.
And the backstory of it was that he did not want to be playing football. He had some academic things he wanted to be doing, but he came from a family where that was a really important thing. So he had all these emotions tied up in the injury, then you're in a halo,
And resentment.
resentment, all those things that he wasn't able to process because that wasn't, it's like, well, as soon as you get your halo off, you're going to go back to football. It's like, whoa.
Like, look what just happened to me. Wait a minute, why would I do that?
So anyway, and it was, I guess it could be kind of psychological, but it was just like talking, and sort of as that happened, the area that had been hurting him just kept heating up and heating up. The muscles around it started relaxing, and the more he talked about it, I said, well, what would you want to say? Like, a lot of what I do is like, I feel like it's time traveling back in history to where was this all started and how can we change it? And so he kind of said what he needed to say to his family, like sort of imagination, visualization, and never came back again. And I thought, oh, well, he probably thought I was way out there. And then like 6 years later, I was somewhere giving a talk, and he said, you have to listen to this woman because she fixed my back and now I can play basketball. I'm like, oh.
Wow, he was there.
Yeah, he
spoke
happened to
up for
be
you.
at wherever
Yeah.
I was giving this talk. But it was just really interesting because it was not what I anticipated at all.
And it was one visit.
One visit.
Well, now, I'm sure that's not the norm.
No, well, I feel like if after 3 visits you don't have a big, I feel like the work I do is more like a catalyst. Most of the people who come to me are seeing other people, like psychologists, social workers, doctors, and I'm like a catalyst to get things moving. And also, I feel it's important, the education part of it, just explaining, that we can become disconnected from our bodies, and the body has so much information that once you can get a person hooked back up where they can pay attention, they don't need me. I'm, like an intermediary.
Yeah.
So I really like people to learn on their own so they can do it themselves, to not rely on me.
Actually, I greatly admire that. Because, I do. Because there's some, there are some professions where there's a suspicion that I just want to hook you in, so you keep coming back and give me a cash flow.
Yeah.
Instead of
No,
I'm
I
here
don't feel that
to
way at
get
all.
you out and back on your feet.
Right. And some people, it's really funny, some people will come like once a year just to kind of
A
tune up or
yeah.
something. Some people will come like, usually only 1 or 2 times, sometimes 3 or 4 at the most. And also I try to, because the work usually is very deep, and so it takes a while to integrate.
Deep in what respect?
In that that it's meaningful,
Okay.
and it's new information for your body, your mind. It's like, oh, how do I process that, whatever this was? And so it takes time to kind of integrate that into your body.
Now, speaking of history and being kind of a history detective, before the show you mentioned something about past life regressions as well.
Yeah, I've had I'd say about 2 out of every 10 clients, we end up going back to a past life as the originating factor of whatever they have going on.
And how do you even identify that? How do you know that
Well,
someone has this past life that's affecting them?
I've also been trained in that. I forgot to tell you about that.
Yes,
With,
you've been trained in many different things.
Yeah,
right?
you forget all the classes. But Dr. Brian Weiss, he's one of the foremost authorities, but I took a class with him, and I've read a lot of his books. Basically, what I have sort of this standing question that I ask if we're kind of not getting anywhere, or even at the beginning, I say, go to the time and place that this pain started, this situation started, you first felt really anxious, and then people sometimes will go to a past life.
And do they know that they've had these past
And
lives?
what I say is, like, whatever's coming up, just talk about whatever's coming up. And it might not make any sense at all, and they'll just start talking about whatever it is. And then sometimes it will be like so relevant to whatever's happening that they're instantly, oh, this makes sense. And half the time when they come out, they're like, what was that? And they've never experienced that before, and they might never experience it again. It happened because that was the key to healing whatever was happening.
So do they sometimes discover that they remember these past lives, or do they already know this coming in?
No. They usually don't know it coming
They
in.
don't know that they've...
Some people know it coming in and they say, I have this past life I'd like to work on because I'm not clearing it. But I can give you a really great example. I had this woman who had been a client for a while, on and off, for physical things. And she was getting married, and came to me and she said, it's sort of strange, but I'm feeling anxious about the wedding. And I said, oh, well, and the guy was great, and she felt really good about it. But then she would have these little anxieties. And I said, well, we can explore that. I can explore anything. And so right away, when I said, go to the time and place this anxiety first started, she went to a past life.
And had no idea prior to this that
No.
she had one.
She was like, and I have to mention, because part of this story is that she's a big woman, and she always wore these flowing dresses with a belt. And she took the belt off while I worked on her because you don't want restrictions. And so she went back to this past life where she was like a dancer in a Middle Eastern like restaurant, way station, whatever. She was a dancer, and then the guy who owned the place was her, I don't know if it was her husband, but anyhow, they were together. But she fell in love with the young musician who was playing the music, and they got together, were discovered, and had his head chopped off, and it was the current husband. The guy she was going to marry was the guy who got his head chopped off in the previous life. So she recognized his soul as...
Oh, my goodness.
So she said, so then, and then we talked some of that also. She said that was also related to weight.
Did he know that he had this?
Oh, no, neither one of them. I mean, this just happened.
Right.
She had no recollection of this till this very moment on the table. And then she talked about how that was part of her weight thing, is that she felt like it was her fault for being young and beautiful and attractive. And so all these different things we were talking about. And then we finished up the session, and she was so excited because she said, I'm so excited about the wedding now because I know he's not going to get his head chopped off.
My anxiety's gone.
Like I said, I love this business. You just never know what's going to come up. But anyhow, so she jumped off the table, and she put her belt on. And she said, Mary, she goes, when I came in, this belt was at the first loop, and now I'm at the 5th loop. She said,
wow.
How did you do that? I said, I didn't do anything. So, but we did talk a lot about, because a lot of weight is related to all sorts of different things. So anyhow, that's one wild story.
That is a wild story.
But it was really cool because then she was so excited about her wedding, and it all worked out fantastically. And this old carryover was an anxiety of, oh no, something bad will happen to him.
And he has not been beheaded
No,
yet.
he has not been beheaded in this life.
Just checking.
But I was not expecting that when she came in.
Nor was she, apparently.
No, she was kind of like, we were both blown away. It was like, whoa.
So we talked a little bit before the show too about most of what you do is dismissed by medical science, certainly Western medicine, and I have been going to Western medicine all my life, and it does some great things.
Yeah.
But it's very science focused,
Right.
and if you can't prove it, it's not real.
Yeah.
In the the classic double-blind study, it's
Right.
got to come
Yeah.
out and be clinical trials are all
Right.
about. So what you do in many cases, there may not even be subject to clinical trials. It might be hard to
Right.
design such a thing.
They have case studies sometimes, but it's also individualized, that it's hard to actually do a double-blind study. But what's kind of interesting is there are some recent, I was mentioning to you, there's one recent study that I just saw. There's a lot of information out there. I can send you some afterwards. But one of the most current ones is people being healed and people who are doing healing work. And the research is following the brain waves. And they find that after like 5 or 10 minutes, that the brain waves of the person on the table and the brain waves of the healer become entrained. In other words, they're in sync. Totally in sync. And
this is healers like yourself, right? I mean,
right,
people
right.
practice what you
so
practice.
You'd be, as soon as, and then they were even going so far as like as soon as the person on the table said, oh, I feel something, that was also the moment where the entrainment was starting. So the person intuitively felt something's happening. And so that's one of the few. I mean, I used to really be obsessed with the research because I thought it had proved something to people. But now I'm like, as long as somebody gets helped, I'm not really worried about it. And I figure soon enough, stuff will come out that explains why it all works.
Well, as an explains
why it all works.
well, as an example, the microbiome, which is all the
I love the
bacteria
microbiome.
that
Yeah.
live within us, and this is only, as you know, this is just in recent years that science has recognized that, oh, these are not things to be killed.
Right.
That in fact they're an integral part of who we are,
Right.
and we need them to survive. And then in fact you probably know, I'm sure you know this, that some diseases are linked to imbalances in the microbiome.
Right.
And if you can cure those, you can cure the ailment. So
Yeah.
this is an example of science looking at something, microbes are bad, bacteria are your
Right.
enemy. Well, some are, but in fact, we're loaded with microbes and bacteria, and they're
We're a
part of who
big
we are.
ecosystem.
We're an ecosystem, right?
Basically, I mean.
So this is an example of evolving understanding.
Right.
So coming back
And
to,
I think it's kind of interesting too, because things are really different in other cultures, other countries. Like, for example, in Germany, they'll have energy healers in while people are getting heart surgery. So if a person wants that, they can have that. So, and then Australia, if you're going in for some sort of heart transplant or any kind of heart procedure, there's certain flower essences. They'll say, "Well, get this at the at the pharmacy." So it's we have there's a certain organization that kind of has a lock on things here, and it makes it hard because it's kind of saying that anything that's not this specific way of healing is
doesn't
fake
count.
or not
Yeah.
real, doesn't count. And like I said at the beginning of my career, I was kind of concerned about that, and now I'm just kind of like, if you want to come to me, great. If you don't worry about it, and then we'll see. After one session, you'll know whether it's going to be helpful to you or not. It's not really, and I don't really like people to come a lot. I like them to kind of learn how to connect to the body themselves, and then they're working with their own body in a different way, a healthier way.
So how do you keep yourself informed? In classical or Western medicine, there's all this continuing education. In fact, doctors are required to do that.
Yes, we're required as well.
Okay, so
Yeah.
so how do you do that? There must
Oh my
be-
gosh, there's so many. I actually have what they call it, the license to touch, is under massage therapy.
Like 007, he's got
Yeah,
that.
I guess so. So I'm licensed by the state as a massage therapist, but I really don't do massage. I only do the craniosacral and the other healing work. But so every 2 years I have to take 24 hours of continuing education. This year I've already taken way more than that. I took a class on craniosacral therapy and the immune system, which was really fascinating. And it was just working with how can we help the immune system work better. Because what happens, lots of the current really difficult chronic diseases are immune system related, where the immune system has gone a little haywire and is actually attacking the body, or isn't
inflammation diseases, right?
Right, or allergies, or asthma, or all sorts of things. And then there's the ones where, for some reason, the immune system doesn't mount the response it's supposed to, like in cancer.
Cancer, right.
It doesn't recognize the cancer cell as something it should be going up against. So that was kind of an interesting class. A lot of learning. My brain was very full. And then I took a class with Dr. Brian Weiss on past life regression. So
what's your...
those are both 5-day classes.
What's your, I hate to say career path, that sounds like, oh, I'm going to do this and I'm going to get that certification. But how do you see yourself advancing in your craft?
Well, it's kind of interesting. I've just started, I used to do a lot of classes. I used to do classes for like Loyola and
Where you
Little
would teach
Company
them?
of Mary. Yeah, kind of like de-stressing classes. Basic, how do you use like alternative health techniques in your daily life. I'm not as interested in that right now. I've been thinking about working with other healers to just kind of pass on some of the things I've kind of figured out myself. We'll see what happens. I don't know. I like working individually. Some of the things that I do, you can't do in a large class. It's a more individual thing.
Now, you just mentioned some of the things you figured out on your own. So that gives me the sense that you've found a way to advance the science or advance the craft of what you're doing. And, again, making the Western medical analogy, those doctors who do that publish, and they say, well, I've realized that there's this connection, or here's something new that we didn't realize before.
I've thought about writing down things or having classes. I think A lot of it is so right brain that it's hard to put into words. Does that make sense? I mean, what's happening is I'm putting my hands on somebody and listening to their body.
But, but the reason I think of it is that if you've discovered this and it works really well for you, at some point you'll reach a point where you're going to stop practicing.
Right.
And does that knowledge die with you, or isn't there some way to transmit that?
Well, I also think other people are figuring things out at the same. We have this saying when we take classes that everybody's energy fields are connected. And so by the end of a class, it's almost like you're finishing each other's sentences because, if somebody else knows something, I pick it up. I mean, I don't know if that's real, but it feels real. That you're kind of at an energetic level taking in a lot of information. And that's why sometimes after a class, it's like, wow, I have to really integrate what I just learned, not just the book learning or the demos. It's more like all the other information that you received from the people around you.
So
that's pretty out there, but
but it does in a way answer my question, because certainly if you've learned things, pick things up, then you're transmitting that in these group sessions as well, right?
Right.
So they're picking that up from you,
right?
Right.
Yeah, because a lot of the classes are very hands-on. So you might have lecture in the morning, and then the whole afternoon would be practice, and then the teacher coming around, and you're working individually with people and, seeing what comes up, and then sharing what we've observed, what happened.
So what's the most remarkable thing you've seen in your experience?
Oh my gosh, let's see. Okay, this is, I had a young man come to me who was a college student, and he said, I'm having a real difficult time speaking up in class. He goes, I have all these things I want to say, and then I just can't talk. And so I did one of my classes we have that's called Opening the Avenue of Expression, and you just work all the way up here to kind of help a person release anything that might have been keeping them from speaking up or sharing or expressing their truth or all sorts of things. And then I said, can you go to the time and place where this restriction started? And he went back to kindergarten, that he had an abusive teacher who had never taught kindergarten. She had only taught hearing impaired kids, and she would always turn off the light and say, I'm not turning the light back on until everyone's quiet. So she was really obsessed with everyone being quiet because she'd never really, in my mind, had never really worked with regular kids.
Yeah.
And so he got the message at school, you're supposed to just be quiet all the time. And so
don't speak up.
Don't speak up. And so I said, well, what would you want to say to that teacher? And he had a lot to say to her. And I said, well, what do you want to do? Because a lot of what I do is like when we're back in sort of this past time, I'm like, how can we change it? How can we release that old energy that's been stuck holding that we stay safe by being quiet?
Yeah.
And so he told off the teacher and basically gathered all the little kids, and they went out to the playground. And then he called me that night and said that they had a class, and the teacher's like, who is this kid?
Where did this guy come from?
Yeah, but he
Where's
said it was like I was just having a conversation with the teacher. He said it was like a dramatic shift from just that one session.
Well, on that remarkable story, we're already out of time. So, Mary,
oh, wow, it went so fast. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. It's been a pleasure learning from you. And now
Thanks for having me.
I know more than I did before you came. So.
Thanks.
So thank you for watching us once again. This is Public Perspective. I'm your host, Kevin McDermott, and we've been visiting with Mary Fleming tonight. You can see us every Saturday night on Comcast Channel 19 at 8 o'clock. And you can find us on the web at publicperspective.tv. So till next time, thank you and good night. So.